Good morning, everyone. Thanks again for joining us for another great Qdabra webinar. This morning we have two guest presenters, and you may have been present for their last kind of side presentation into something new and exciting. So we have guest presenters Kevin Bell and Gary Devendorf. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Gary for the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Bree, and thanks, everyone, for attending this session. So as you can see from the title here, upgrading your Excel spreadsheets to a relational web database application on Office 365. It's a mouthful there, but we actually see this as a real core scenario for your business and data needs that we see almost daily. So I'm Gary Devendorf, and with me is Kevin Bell. Kevin, you want to say something?
Yeah. Hi.
So,
add a few words.
Yeah.
Well, I'll talk a lot later.
Right. So we're, until recently, members of the Microsoft Office product team, and Kevin had upgraded himself to a developer on the team, and I was the PM on the team, and now we're freelance people, so we have to do fun things like these seminars, which, we really enjoy, and we really enjoy the technology. So what we're going to talk about briefly is about Excel and sort of why people use it, because let's face it, there's lots of people using Excel for the right reasons and maybe not for the right reasons. Then we'll talk about outgrowing Excel, because there's definitely scenarios where you've used it, it was useful, but it's no longer the right tool for the situation you're in. And then we'll introduce the new relational container, and then how to upgrade to the relational container. And you can actually see some really cool demos Kevin put together. And then we sort of have a hybrid, best of both worlds, because Excel is still very useful for a lot of scenarios. And then we do a little bit of almost like a sales pitch, like, you should do this because it's easy and the tools are really available. So backing up to early days, and I'm old enough to be able to say this, but the very first popular spreadsheet, VisiCalc, I think it was, and then Lotus 123, they pretty much were there to replace balanced ledgers, where you added a column of numbers and a row of numbers, and then you added those two columns together to make sure you got the same thing. You're looking for mistakes. Banks are doing this constantly, adding things up. But since then, people are using spreadsheets for everything from, very complex market forecasts to your bowling average scores. And a lot of people just use them to keep lists together. They didn't do any processing at all. Just let me have a grid where I can write things down like it's a piece of paper. So because it was used by a lot of people for a lot of scenarios, they could start with using it for everything. So simple thing, I'm going to track something. The sample Kevin's going to show you is I'm tracking requests or customers or orders or something in some department. And it was usually done by somebody non-technical, because everyone had a spreadsheet on their computer. They just fired it up, they started typing away. And it was a great way to get value quickly. It beat the heck out of a piece of paper, which, again, those paper ledgers were years and years ago. I can just edit it, I can mail it to people, I can do processing on it and so on. And you got very cool charts and graphs, that I want to see a pie chart and this kind of stuff for my presentation, and spreadsheets were a great way to do that. But let's take a look at then more what we're talking about. So Kevin, you want to grab control?
Control here. And hopefully in just a second everybody's going to be looking at an Excel spreadsheet.
I can see it. So,
okay. So this is kind of the standard Excel spreadsheet that I'm sure everybody's dealt with or worked with somebody. In this case here, what we're showing is kind of some sales data. And let's, for example, say we were selling blue widgets. That was only one product we had. So it was very easy. We could just create an order because they could only order one thing. And you see what we're tracking here is the company name. We've got kind of a customer ID, who the contact person was, and then, of course, we need the address so we know where to ship it to. And then over on this side, we say what the date the order was, what the unit price was, our quantity, and then we have a total. And things like the year, we're calculating from the order date as well as the order total. That's a very standard kind of, very simple spreadsheet. If we jump down to the end here, you can see we have about 2,100 records in here. And this is going to be fine, but it's going to start to get unwieldy as we go. And the beauty of having it in Excel is we can do things like create pivots. So here I created a very simple pivot that just said, show me my sales by year. And if we jump over to the chart based on that, this is where Excel really kind of shines. It gives you the ability to kind of quickly do charts and graphs. So you can see here, when we started selling our blue widgets, it was trending up. We did better this year, and then all of a sudden it started to decline. So, what's the call for that? Well, maybe everybody has bought blue widgets that needs to buy blue widgets, or maybe there's a competitor out there. But as we want to do something to kind of regenerate our sales, we're going to have to do something different with our spreadsheet. we can't really track if people are ordering blue widgets and green widgets and pink widgets. So we need to kind of try to break this into a database. And with that, I think Gary's going to kind of show you.
Well, okay.
I think, aren't you?
Yeah, I can do that. I can say when did we show our sorting, but.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I was going to show, I meant to show the sorting. Yep, my bad. Hang on, let me take it back real quick here.
Yeah, take it back.
So one of the great things we can do here is the sorting. And so what you'll see here, if I were to filter on the company name, you can see I've got a lot of duplicate orders coming in here. So you can see each, customer orders a dozen or so every couple of years. It's very easy to group like this, and I can sort by, the order date. What you'll see is the data is very repetitive. We start getting things like here, like we have a Thomas Hardy for all these, but somebody else put an order in here, they called him Tom Hardy. So there's different things like that that can lead to kind of issues when we import the data.
Right, so if I wanted to try and find out all the orders that Thomas Hardy used, I'm not going to find that one that Tom Hardy is in there. So my data is not in a nice format that I can feel confident that I have it correct.
Yep. So now I think I'm going to hand back to Gary, right?
Yes, that would be great. Or do I have to steal it?
No, it's coming back to you.
So do you see my screen yet? I have to push another button.
Yes, there you go.
All right. So super high level, we just talked about, Excel, and these are cases that we see all the time where people come to us and say, we have this spreadsheet running my entire business. It does everything. It's great. And I spend all my time pulling out my hair trying to figure out problems with the data and things. I don't have confidence that it's doing what I want it to do. Again, Excel spreadsheets are great, but you can really outgrow them. Now, in this case, you saw 2,000 orders, and let's face it, when you start it, you have one order, then 10 orders, and maybe 100 orders, and it's not too bad. You can scroll around, you can see the data, you can see what you need, but what happens when you get to, we've had 1 million rows. People have created, thousands and millions. So navigation, finding my way around, validation, how do I know that the data is correct? I'm using the same constant sort of schema when I say things. Also, presentation, how do I see all the records at once? Or you saw a slice there of the data, but how did I do that? I have to do that kind of stuff all the time. And then repeating data is actually very important. You saw that in the spreadsheet. For example, you had a customer with many orders, and the phone number and address for every single one of those records was repeated, right? And it was the same because it came from the same customer and the same contact person. So I'm repeating that, which you might say, who cares? It's a computer. It doesn't care about repeating things. It's very good at that and being consistent. But it introduces the possibility of errors, like maybe you typed in the phone number wrong for this one order. So you don't really have that constant sort of schema. Also reporting what ifs. I wanted to know, Kevin showed some charts that could give some information there, but if I wanted to see all orders for a certain zip code and that were of a certain year, and all kinds of what ifs, what happened, this and that. So how do I do that? Also, it's very easily broken. What if I go in there and I start typing in the wrong column? Oops, what was there before? I don't know. I can hit, go back and so on. But you're really messing directly with the raw data. There isn't anything on there trying to keep me from doing anything bad. And if I wanted business rules, like, hey, if the order's over a certain amount, I wanted people to know, holy cow, we have this really big order. We need to adjust for that. And then access control. Who can get in there? Anyone who can get on that computer and get to that spreadsheet. How do I say these fields are locked and stuff? Now, you can do a lot of these things with Excel if you're really good at it, but most people aren't, and they just create these giant spreadsheets, and after a while they get in trouble. So Excel is great, but it's not always the best container for what you're trying to do. So introducing the concept of a relational database, which is around for dealing with large amounts of data, and data that's related to itself. So you don't have to repeat things over and over again, you just reference it. I know it's a little maybe confusing right now, but hopefully you'll understand that more time we get done. Databases are everywhere. I mean, the Oracle as a company exists because of relational databases. There's lots and lots, and they usually cost a lot of money, and they're very complicated, and the DBA and that kind of stuff. But that's really not the case anymore with Office 365 and the cloud. So enterprise scale, so now I can have millions and millions and millions of records, and I can feel confident about my data. hard to break. I go in there and I have a form and I just use the form and I can't change a formula unless I'm a designer. I can't create a new form. I can just use what I'm allowed to use. And also I can only do what I'm allowed. Like the designer might say, you're just a reader. You can only go and look things up. You can't change it because you're not authorized and so on. So I have a really strict control over how this data is edited, read, created, and so on. So I get validation. Make sure you pick the right things. You didn't type in some random values. And they're everywhere, so you know they have value because there's relational databases for everything in your life. You'll be looking things up. You may not know it. So let's show a little demo about moving from our great container of Excel into a better container for large amounts of data. So Kevin, you want to grab control?
Yep. So.
Nice graphic.
Yeah, sorry, the baseball. Okay. So what we're going to do to start with is we're actually going to import our Excel spreadsheet into the kind of traditional Access desktop database. I'm sure most of you have used Access in some way, shape, or form. It's been around for, I think, we're going on
21 years. Yeah.
22 or 23, I think. But
oh, you might be right.
It's been out a long time. So we're going to go ahead and import that same spreadsheet, and I can simply do that by going to Excel and saying import, and then I'm going to go ahead and browse for it, and I should see one called sales. I'm going to open that, and we actually want to import. The other option would be to link, which means the data would still live in the spreadsheet, but we'd miss all the benefits of having a truly relational database. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK, and you can see it popped up, and it sees all three tabs, and I can look at the pivot, or I can look at the sales. If I look at the chart, it won't show me any data because there's no real table that it recognizes. But what we clearly want to do is we want to import that sales data. So we'll hit Next. Now it's smart enough to realize that our first row contained the column headers. If it didn't, it would just import that data and we get weird things. For example, we'd say order date and we try to put that into a date field. So we'll go Next. And then it gives us a chance to actually set the field types. Unlike Excel, we can strongly type each field. So for most cases, it's going to pick short date, which is fine. There are a couple of things you might want to change. For example, the year that's being imported doesn't need to be a number. There's no 2000 and a half year. So we can make that an integer. And the same with the quantity. It's thinking it's a double, but again, we can make that an integer because somebody can't order half a widget. And then everything else should be set to currency and currency, so that looks good. So let's go ahead and hit Next. And then it wants to know if you want to create a primary key, which is always good to have a primary key because it's indexed faster. If you're linking to other data, we always want to have that. So either we could let it choose our own, which in this case there is no good unique identifier because we have a customer code, but since we have multiple orders in there, that's not going to make a lot of sense. So we're going to go ahead and Access assign it and just basically create what we call an auto number that'll fill everything out sequentially. And then we're going to import this into a table. And now the optional thing we're going to do here, which is really where the strength of Access in the desktop world is, we can use a table analyzer. So I'm going to go ahead and check that, and we'll see that run in just a second. So it says, okay, I've imported your data. Do you want to go ahead and run the analyzer? And we'll say yes. And the first couple of screens here just give you kind of an overview of what's happening. It's really going to try to go look for misspellings or redundant data. So we're going to skip that. And then again, this is just more of telling you what it's going to try to do and how it works, where it's going to break the data into separate tables.
Yeah, this really talks about one-to-many relationships. Remember I talked about the address being repeated over and over again? Instead, we can put an address in there once, and then when you pick that customer, it just references the other table's address. So it really makes your data smaller, but also much more consistent. So
exactly.
So it's doing that now for you.
Kind of the rule of thumb with the database is you want to store it one place in a database. That way, if it's right, great, and if it's wrong, you have to change it in one place. Whereas in a spreadsheet, if somebody changed an address, do I change all the addresses? Do I just change it for new orders? It's never really clear. So now is where the wizard is really going to do its magic, and it can say, all right, do you want me to go ahead and decide how you want to split that database up or not? If I say no, it's going to give me just my table, and I'm going to have to drag the fields over, which I could do because I know my data. But I'm going to go ahead and let the wizard decide. And what you can see there is, oh, what happened there? Not what I was expecting. Okay, it actually gave me a bunch of different tables, which this didn't work this morning like this. Okay, great. Well, in this case, we don't want to have the year, so we're going to go ahead and drag that over to here, and we want order to be over here. And then this one here, so this looks like our order information, and this one here looks like our customers. We've got the company, the customer code. The country actually belongs to that. And then it broke the contact title out, which probably makes sense because I probably have a lot of sales reps or product managers or whatever in there, and it sees that as being repetitive. But in our case, to make it simple, we're just going to go ahead and leave the contact title in the table. So now what I have is basically two tables. I have my order table and I have my customer table. So if I try to move next on here, it's going to say, hey, you haven't given it any friendly names. You want to do that? Well, I don't want to move on, so I'm going to go ahead and double-click on a table. And so now I can say, well, here's my orders. And then here I can say, here's my customers. Hit OK. So now I've got friendly names. So now if I go ahead and hit next, it's going to say, do the bold fields in each table uniquely identify the record set? And in this case, there isn't anything. So it's going to go ahead and generate the auto number for me. So we'll hit next. And now here's where I think it's really kind of cool. And let me zoom that out. You can see that we showed that Tom Hardy earlier, where everything else was Tom Hardy. It detected that that was kind of an outlier, and so it's giving us a chance to go ahead and clean up that data. So if I go here and look at it, it's going to say, okay, what do you want to select it to? Well, I know that it's still around the horn and it's Thomas Hardy, so I can go select the record that it belongs to. And then the next one, you can see I have Bergland something or other, and I've got Christina Bergland with an A-N-D. And if I go look at what it's automatically suggested here, is it realized that it's U-N-D. So it said, oh, everything's the same, but I've got one character. I'm going to automatically go ahead and do that. Now, if I didn't want to do that and wanted to create a record, I could say leave as is. But what that would do is it actually create a duplicate record in there for me. Everything would be the same except for the spelling of her last name. So obviously, if you've got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of records, this could be kind of an arduous process. But at least it's going to help clean it up before you import it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit next. And then the last step of the wizard basically says, okay, do you want to go ahead and clean up, or you want to go ahead and create a query that's going to reproduce what your sales table look like? And in our case, we're going to use that in a later demo, so I'm going to go ahead and say yes. So I'll go ahead and hit finish. And then for whatever reason, it wants to bring up the Access Help window. And we're done. And you can see what it's done here is it's taken my sales table and called it sales old. It's created a query which is running right here, which basically duplicates what my table looked like before. But in addition, I have the customers table here, which let me close the field list so you can see all the fields. And you can see I only have 89 unique customers. So of those 2,000 order records, it pulled out 89 unique customers. And then in our order table should have the same amount of records it had before. So by doing it in the database, or the desktop database version of Access, we get all these benefits of having these kind of legacy wizards that do all the cleanup for you. So now we've got a relational database that basically spit our orders and customers out.
Right, and you could do cleanup here now. What if you decided now this company's changed their name? You can go in there and change it. Or if you decide you want to add a new field, like you want a status of the order, you can go do that here. So there's a lot of things you can do, and you have very powerful tools here. I mean, you can run a query that says change every expense plus 10% or that kind of stuff. So this is a great tool for massaging your data and getting it the way that it should have been, that Excel sort of fell down on.
Exactly. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Gary.
All right. And you see my slides, Kev?
Yep. You're good.
We're good to go. Okay, so we talked about a relational database and we showed access. We had that one-to-many relationship. It's a much nicer container for data. But what about a web relational database? Because those databases had a lot of the same problems, the old desktop, as the Excel spreadsheet. Like, who could see it? Well, whoever could get on that computer and go to that database, they could start messing around with it. So we have the advantages of a real relational database, but I want to use it from a browser, so I don't have to install anyone on my desktop. And this is a lot like getting to a SharePoint list. Who can get to it? Well, whoever we decide to let get to it. Read access, read-write access, author access, that kind of stuff. So if I have a browser access to the same functionality, then anywhere I am in the world, I can just log in, open up a browser, and get to my data and start doing my job. And many people can be doing it at once. I don't have to have people sitting at the same computer kind of trying to do their job. It's secure because, again, it's on the web. It's part of a service. In this case, Office 365, centrally managed. So if someone leaves the company, you just go in there and turn off their access. Or when you take them out of the system, they no longer exist and they can't get there. It's backed up, right? I don't worry about it crashing. I don't worry about, gee, my computer died and I don't have a backup. It's all there for me. And also, I make updates. I update it in one place, and everyone gets those updates. So there's not this whole version like, oh, which one are you running? And it's scalable. We talked about millions of records, and it's based on a standard, SQL. And there's lots of people who know how to interact with SQL and use SQL database and so on. So we talk about the advantages, of which there's many. We went from an Excel spreadsheet, we went to a desktop access database just because it was a good tool for us to make our data nicer. And then we've upgraded now. We're talking about upgrading to a web relational database. So how do you do that? Well, you can import from lots of sources. You could go directly from Excel, from the web, or you could do the step we showed you, which we kind of recommend. It makes it nicer. I could pull in data from SharePoint, legacy access data, desktops, text files. And then I need to convert it to a relational model, which you saw Kevin do. He did that one-to-many. He said, gee, I need multiple different tables. That's a relational model. So instead of just one giant list, I now have several lists with relationships between them. And then I can create and edit tables. Now, you saw that when you pull the data in, it made tables for you. So maybe they're fine. Maybe I don't have to edit them, and I can just use them as is. That's why I say optional. And what we didn't show you was forms, where I can then push a button and generate a form based on that data in that table. And then you can move fields the way you want. You can add validation, like this must be a number, or this must be less than 100, and that kind of things, which helps the end user. And if you want to do more advanced, you do macros, where you, for example, you can take the quantity and the cost and then make a sum of the total and have that calculated automatically instead of someone typing it in. And then the macros are very powerful for lots of things. And then reports. We can generate lots of queries that do all kinds of different reporting. And that's one thing people use web databases or just relational databases for, is just for the reporting. So let's take a look at what our sample now looks like when it's running in a web database.
Okay. So hopefully in just a second you'll be able to see.
Yep, I see it.
Office 365. Okay. So this is Office 365, and for those of you who haven't seen Access or seen our webinar a couple weeks ago, Access is actually a SharePoint app now. And so I can go ahead and add it like any other app. So I'm going to go ahead and say add an app. And then because I know the cheat, if I click on name, Access source to the top because it starts with an A. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And let's call this.
So this is essentially a template in SharePoint to say I want to build an app based on this template called Access.
And so now what it's doing is it's actually going out there and it's creating a SharePoint app for me. But more importantly, it's actually provisioning a SQL Server Azure database on the back end. And so this can take anywhere from 20 seconds to maybe 2 or 3 minutes depending on the load on Azure. So basically we're in the queue right now, and it's going to hopefully in just another couple of seconds go ahead and create the database that's wired up to this kind of template app here.
Yeah, this is actually very complex stuff, but luckily it's hidden from you. So it's all being done for you automagically.
Yep. And there you see it's actually done now. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it. And if you remember when we opened up the blank desktop database, it was just this empty application. We're a little more friendly now, if this will load.
There it goes.
It's working on it. And it's still working on it.
Yes, remember there's tables now in SQL Azure. There's a UI been built for you. There's lots of things that have happened.
Well, right now there's absolutely nothing. It's just spinning here. It is a blank database. What we should get here is a little prompt to say, hey, we don't detect there's any user tables in your database. Do you want to go ahead and add them? Oh, there it goes.
Oh, there it is, yeah.
Finally. Okay. So what it's basically saying here is, great, you've got a blank app. There's nothing in here. You want to put some data because it's a database. So I can go ahead and click on this link here, and it'll basically say go ahead and open it and access. So I get the little prompt here. And what this is going to do is download a pointer file, and it should go ahead and spin up a copy of Access here. Whoops. Let's try that again. I have a copy open that, there it goes. Okay, so now it's got the right version. So what it's basically doing here is it's talking to the server and saying, oh, go ahead and open up the desktop version of Access, but we're going to go ahead and connect it to a web database. So,
right, so this is your, right, this, I'm going to say the desktop is where you do your editing, authoring. So you're going to be doing design stuff. Most people wouldn't be doing design stuff. They'd be just using the database. But right now we're designing it.
Right. And so like the desktop database, I could go in here and I could say add a new blank table, which would give me the grid where I could go in here and I could pick the different field types and I could define my own table if I knew what I wanted to do. We also have something new called table templates. So since we are creating an order database, I could type in orders and it's going to give me options that it thinks are related to orders. So orders, customers, clients, employees, products, vendors, etc. These are all things that are kind of related to, ordering products. But in our case, we've got that Access database we created that's, relational. So we can go ahead and import that. And like Gary showed you earlier, you can import from SharePoint, text, any kind of ODBC/SQL Server. We could have brought it in straight from Excel, but we wouldn't have gotten the split tables. It would just be one big table. So we really wouldn't be that much better off. In our case, we're going to go ahead and import it from Access. So I'm going to click here. I'll click Browse. Let me jump over to Documents. Hit Import. And you'll see this is going to look a lot like it did in the desktop database, where we've got customers and orders. It also shows us the sales order old table, which we don't want to import because that's the flat table. So let's go ahead and click on Customers. We'll click on Orders. I'll hit OK. And this will take just a few moments to bring it in. So basically it's importing the customers, which is a short table. They have only 90 records or so. Now it's importing the orders. Now it's recreating the relationships to make sure an order belongs to a customer. And that's it. So now we're done. And unlike the desktop database, it actually built some objects for us. So it actually built some views. Now it's really hard to kind of see here because this is the designer. So I'm going to go ahead and flip back over to the database we created. I'm going to just go ahead and hit F5 to refresh the window here.
Yes, live demos.
Yes.
This is proof that it's real live. We didn't make it up.
Yeah, there's no smoke and mirrors going on here. It does take a little bit longer the first time you open an app because it's kind of going in the back end, it's compiling it and making sure everything works. But it seems to be running a little bit slower than normal. So, okay,
and there it goes.
And there you go. So now instead of having that blank database, I actually have a database. And all I had to do was import my data. Everything else was built on the fly for me. So you can see we've got a couple different objects here. We've got the data sheet, which kind of gives you the grid-looking view, so I can see all my customers. And then I have the list detail, which I think is my favorite view. Whereas I select here, you can see the information on this side changes, and it actually shows me the related orders here. And I can quickly drill into an order here, so I can see the information about it. I can also filter. Let's say I want to look for customers that are in London. If I spell London right, you can see quickly of those 89 or 90 customers, it said these 5 or 6 are all based in London or have London somewhere. So this is all stuff you get out of the box. I didn't have to do anything. Now, that's one piece of it. I did want to go ahead and link this back up to my spreadsheet, right? Because I have this information here that is, basically the same information, but I don't really have that rich charting or graphing or pivot table, but I can get that. So what I have to do in order to do that is go back to my database, and if I go into kind of the backstage area, under Info there's a Manage Connection tab. So if I click on here, because it's a SQL Server Azure database, I have to turn on the firewall rules. And I've got two choices. I can do it from my location, or I can do it from any location. For this demo, I'm just going to go ahead and turn it on for myself. And then I can choose to turn on read-only or read-write connection. Well, in this case, I don't want people to be able to edit the data from Excel because they're going to think that they can do that, and they don't. It's kind of a flat link. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on the read-only connection. And what this is going to do is it's going to go out there and say, okay, enable a read-only user and show me the credentials. So right here you can see I get the server name, I get the database name, I get the user, and I get a password. So with this information I can go into Excel and I can link that. So let me show you one I've already done, because it does take a little bit of futzing. So this is the exact same database. Here, the only difference is it's linked, right? So I've actually got a data source connection up here that is pointing to that database to pull down my sales. And again, I'm talking to that query that we let it create, so it flattens it out and it basically reproduces what I had before. So I can do all my filtering, all my sorting. If you look at my pivots, they all work the same. My charts have the exact same data. But the beauty of this now is that as the data changes online, it's going to change here. So to show that, let me go back over to here. Now this is the exact same database. The only difference is I turned the connection on earlier, and I did a little bit of cleanup. So you can see I put little pretty icons here. I also changed the order of some of the fields, and I give a grand total here. So I'm going to go into this order, and to kind of simulate, somebody going in and actually creating more orders, I'm just going to change this order in 2014 from a quantity of 2 to 20,000. So now you can see I should add roughly $250,000 to my 2014 sales, and that's it. I've just updated that data. It's in one place. It works. So now as I hire, salespeople to sell blue widgets and green widgets, we can go ahead and have them update it remotely. And so now,
I was going to say you could have 10 or 20 people around the world all using this database through the web, and then the data all goes into one central place.
Exactly. So let's flip back over to that spreadsheet. Now all I have to do is go ahead and refresh the link here, and it's going to say, do you want to go ahead and do it? And I got to copy the password. We'll paste that in here. And so now if you looked here, that link just updated. So it's now showing me my 20,000 and my total here. If we go to the pivot, refresh the pivot, see that it's updated now. And if we go to the chart, you can see the chart refreshed. And so that popped up. So that lets us put the data in one central location. As it's changed, the person using the Excel spreadsheet just has to go ahead and change the data, or refresh the data rather.
Well, that's great. So Excel is still very useful. You're still using it in this case, just so the data is no longer in this sort of haphazard, loosely contained environment. It's now in a real relational database, but I can still interact with Excel like I know and love from the past.
Yes.
All right.
So with that, I'll hand it back to Gary.
And do you see my slides, Kev?
Yes.
All right. So what we saw was the best of both worlds. Again, relational database, SQL, it's all up there in SQL Azure. I can do all relational database complex things I want. But we linked the data to Excel, and Excel could do charts and graphs. It could do some formulas on, some reporting, some more screens, and so on. And just so that data is now an external data source as far as Excel's concerned. So We show you all this because our experience has been that people have Office 365 and they don't use it for a lot of things. And it frustrates the product team because we're there making really cool features like this and then no one's using it. So we're sort of been on a crusade here that you have this. If you have Office 365, you already have this at no extra cost. That relational database up on SQL Azure that's kind of done for you, that's there. So you should go ahead and use it and get the most value out of your investment. And it's a great place for relational data. You might be thinking, oh, I have other relational data. Why don't I just move it to the cloud? It's an easy way to move it to the cloud. And Access Web Apps are what we call those apps, but if you look at your services in the back end of Office 365, you'll see an entry called Access Services, which is on by default. And some people might turn it off, your admin people, but just go look for that, and it lets you know that you actually have that functionality. So that was what we want to talk about today. There's the Access Team blog. We created some videos and screenshots and things there in the past that show a lot of this information. We have some more webinars planned all around sort of Access Web Apps. We think they're super useful and that people just don't know about them, so you have a chance to be like the first person in your organization that knows how to do this stuff, because it tells you that's not very hard. There's a white paper in the works on migrating, so migrating from your legacy Access databases, and I believe there's some Excel things up to Access Web Apps. And we actually did a webcast just a while ago on introduction to the Access Web Apps. So you saw when Kevin was showing you how I can actually go in and filter and sort and find and work inside the web. Well, this one goes in much more deeper on that. It's an introduction on how to use those kind of tools. So that's what we have for you today. Hopefully you'll go try this if you have Office 365, and if you don't have Office 365, you can do some of this stuff on-prem. There's ability to set up access services on-prem in your environment, with SharePoint. We just think it's a lot easier if you already have Office 365. So with that, I guess we were looking to see if there's any questions popped up.
We do. We have some questions. So there's a couple here. The first one is, could I use a split screen? Yes. I assume this is kind of more for the presentation, so I wasn't flipping back and forth. The problem is I never know what size screen people are watching it on, so I wanted to give the biggest real estate possible. That wasn't the question.
Also, you have like 5 screens, so it might get confusing. So.
It's only 4, but yeah. And then I think Bree answered the one question. Do all the users have to have a license, or is it just the 365 license for the single file system? And that's kind of a two-edge question. You need one Office 365 account to go ahead and create the Access database, so have that author permission. But for each of those accounts, you can invite, I think it's at least 500, if not 1,000, depending on what level you're on, guest users. And the guest users don't need to have anything other than a login with whatever the Microsoft account or whatever Live ID used to be. So that web sales information, that kind of web database, all they need to have is just the login. And they can have edit permissions, they can have read-only permissions. They will never get author permissions, which is probably fine.
Right.
And then,
so you essentially invite people. You say, okay, these are the list of email addresses that I want to allow have access to it, and they get an email saying, hey, you now have access to this thing without having a license. So.
Yes. And then if you're going to share the Excel spreadsheet or any external data connections, there's really only 2 accounts you have. You've got the reader account and you've got the read-write account. And so when you share that, you're going to have to give them the account information as well as the password, but they don't have to have, and in fact, there's no way to create separate accounts for each user.
Right, for SQL, yeah.
Yes. And then the next question is it possible to have an Office 365 local server architecture? And the answer there is yes. If you install SharePoint 2013 on-prem, and then enable the Access services, and you'd have to go ahead and configure your SQL Server, you can actually do that online as well.
Right, and there is a white paper on how to do that, so
yes.
it is supported configuration.
Some of the advantages there are you have complete control of your SQL Server, so you can make your databases as big as you want. In the Office 365 online version, you're limited to a database of 1 gigabyte. Which, if you're just putting data in there, is actually really big. But you may hit into if you're using images or you've got just a ton of data. And then there was one other thing I was going to add in this. I think I forgot what it was. Oh, the other thing is you won't get the updates. So as new features roll out, you won't get those when you're in the on-prem. You'd have to wait for the, I guess the next major release to presumptively get all those things rolled out. But yes, you can put it behind your firewall, so you can definitely put that on there. And then, let's see, John's got a question. Reports from a web app. I can actually show you how to do that real quick. Let me take control again. It basically uses Access to create the reporting database. So I assume you can see my screen right now.
Yep.
So let me go ahead and open up a database here. So this is the one that I had updated earlier. You can actually turn on the reporting features right here by simply saying Create Reporting Database. And test. And what this is going to do is it's going to turn on the order connection for me if it's not already. Enable the and then it's going to crash. Excellent. Let's try that once more. That's a new one. I haven't seen that crash. But basically, what you're going to do is you're going to end up creating a blank access database. And then, similar to how I linked the Excel spreadsheet to the SQL database, it's going to link tables to Access. And then you can create reports. There is no reports built in immediately. So I'm not sure. Okay, let's try this once more just to, we'll say create reports. And it's just warning me that basically I'm going to have information stored in there that's like the username and password for the reports.
Yeah, so once this is done, you have the rich reporting environment that desktop Access has had for years and years and years.
So you can see here that I end up getting the orders, and I get some other tables as well, and the customers. But if I go look at the customer table here, that's the same exact data, and that's actually talking directly to the SQL Server database. So I could now go in here and say, create report off that, and boom, I've got a report.
Right, which is great for printing if you ever need to do that. That's great formatting.
Yes. Let's keep moving on to questions because I know we're kind of running over a bit. Let's see, web app versus SharePoint list to access client. And then I think the next question is kind of similar. SharePoint list has a 5,000 item limit. What about web apps? So basically a SharePoint list is, kind of a flat list. Obviously the database can be relational. There is no limit on the number of records you can have. So you're limited to 1 gigabyte. So that's a lot of data. I put in hundreds and hundreds of thousands of records in real-world situations. When I was testing things, I've created multiple millions of records, and it works just fine. It's a database. There's no real limit to what you can do. So that gets you past the limit of the SharePoint list. You can then link that out. Now you can link to existing SharePoint lists in the web database, but it'll be read-only. So you can get to data. It must be in a SharePoint list for other reasons. You can actually tie that in there, and you can at least kind of consume that data. You won't be able to edit it, though, or add new.
Right, but you can create relationships between that. So you bring in your list of valid customers, and then when you create an order, you can just pick from them. So it's very handy. It'd be great if it was read-write. And stay tuned. We're looking to solve that problem here outside of Microsoft. We'll have a presentation on that maybe in a week or so.
Yeah. And then the last question that appears is if you update the data in Excel, will the 365 be updated? Basically looking for synchronization. And I don't believe so. In this case, I used a read-only connection. So it can't go back to the data. But this is usually just a simple link down. I think
you should be able to. There are ways to set up a read-write connection. In which case you do changes here. I've done demos of this in the past, so that's very cool because then you can change it in either place. So someone on the web can make the change, or someone in Excel can make the change.
You just need to be very careful how you do that because
step on each
you
other.
don't want them, changing, because what I've got here, for example, if I were to change the address in one of these values here, that's only stored in the database in one place, so it has to be updatable. And it's possible my query is not going to be updatable, depending on how it was structured. In my case, it should be, because it's fairly simple. But if I think I'm going in and changing just this one value,
it won't let you, yeah.
Well, I'd actually be changing it for all the values, because it's really only stored one place in the database. So with that, I think that's all the questions. If I missed a question, somebody re-ask your question or.
And yeah, I think that is all the questions we have. Thank you, Kevin and Gary, for a wonderful presentation. And again, to the audience, if you go ahead and fill out that survey report at the end, you'll get all the slides, and we really appreciate your feedback. It helps us improve future webinars. And with that, have a great Thursday.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep, thank you. Thanks, Kev.